Well, I have 12 noon. Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us for session 12 and the Refocus and Rebuild webinar series focused on helping Virginia businesses reopen in a COVID-19 world. My name is Sandy Ratliff. I am with Virginia Community Capital. If you're not familiar with us, we are a community development financial institution focused on lending, community innovation services, and investing in Virginia. We are delighted to be a partner in this program with the Virginia Small Business Development Center Network, GenEdge, University of Virginia's College at Wise, Office of Economic Development, and the Southwest Virginia Alliance for Manufacturing. This is a 13-week series, and it's hard to believe that next week will be our final session, but I hope that those that are returning today and watching this, that over the last 11 weeks, you've been learning a lot about developing your own resiliency plan for your business. And if you note, whenever you receive an email reminder from me, I've had a link in those emails that will take you to templates and a guidebook that you can use to develop your own resiliency plan for your business. Now, before we get started and I turn it over to my co-host today, I wanted to let you know that in order that we keep this webinar flowing and stay within our 1 hour goal, we have muted everyone. However, we want to hear from you. So if you have a question for our presenter today, if you will post that in the Q&A section, and we will address those at the end of the presentation. I will now turn the program over to Courtney Connor Stringer, Director of Professional Development at UVA's College at Wise, to introduce our speaker and moderate the session. So Courtney, it's all yours.
Thank you, Sandy. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I would like to tell you a little bit about UVA Wise, Office of Economic Development. We do a lot of work in the region. We're so happy to work with all the partners here today. And we also offer professional development trainings for companies. We do customized training and just open enrollment programs as well. So we would like to hear any programs you need for your staff or individual needs. And without further ado, I will introduce Miss Kathy Steele, who I have the honor of having with us today. She is the Communication Director for UVA Wise. She has worked at the college for nearly 14 years and serves as the UVA Wise spokesperson, Freedom of Information Officer, and is the editor of the UVA Wise magazine. She also chairs the college's crisis communication team and serves on the crisis team. Prior to taking the position at UVA Wise, she was an award-winning reporter for the Bristol Herald-Courier. She covered federal, state, and local government, courts, and the crime beats. She has been featured in several programs on Discovery ID involving her work in covering murder cases. So, Kathy, we're so happy to have you with us, and I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thanks for that introduction. I'm glad to be here today. I wanted to touch on a variety of topics for crisis communication because that's a very important part of dealing with any crisis. So I'll give you some general ideas of what you can do to protect your company, your agency, or even yourself. So bear with me as we go on here. Next slide, Sandy. A poor crisis communication plan has ripple effects. It can upend lives, businesses, mess stock prices up, destroy employee morale and reputations. And all of this can happen in a second with just a slip of a tongue or even a tweet these days. And if you remember the BP oil spill a few years ago, the CEO told people he just wanted to get his life back. And that really destroyed the company for a long time. Or the Carnival Cruise CEO who came across as uncaring when he had some of his passengers actually die in some of the terrible events they had there over a few months. And even Mitt Romney, in his presidential campaign, he talked one day about his wife not knowing which of her Cadillacs to drive each day when she decided to go somewhere. So it's the smallest little things can make a difference. Okay, next slide. A crisis is fluid and it's dynamic, and it includes dangers and also opportunities. It can end up being a turning point for better or worse. It all depends on how the crisis is handled, and really how it's communicated will make all the difference. A good communication plan can help a crisis from getting out of control. It can help manage the perception of a crisis. And often we find that it's not the reality of a crisis, but the public perception that's the major issue and causes all the problems. A good crisis communication plan can help a company or an organization emerge even stronger and more respected from a crisis. And always remember that the news agencies and the reporters, they have plenty of resources at their hands. They have contacts that they can call for details, and they've got databases to help them, and staff that know the value of research, and they know how to use those tools. And most of them have an internal lie detector, so be careful when you talk to them. It's important to tell the truth when you speak with reporters, and they often ask questions that they already know the answers to. That's just their way of testing to see if you are being truthful with them. And we know everybody has a mobile phone with a video camera, so always keep in mind that there's a good chance that a news reporter already has seen a video of an incident that you might be dealing with. So it's important to remember that so your account of the situation will match what that video shows, because that could be a disaster if there's any discrepancies there. And we've all seen video clips run on the news and on the internet over and over again. And the majority of them are cringeworthy. I don't even like to watch some of them, and it's just played over and over and over again. And you may have heard the old saying that there's always you should never get into a fight with someone who buys ink by the barrel. And these days you need to change that to bandwidth by the gigabyte, because the internet gives unlimited space for someone to tear you or your company or your agency to shreds. They've got all the space they need to do that. So keep that in mind. All right, next slide. Team building. If you're lucky enough to work for a company or an agency with several employees, you really should consider building a crisis communication team. And you need to consider what people should be a part of that team. Pick members that represent nearly every aspect of your organization. You know, who buys the items that you may need in a crisis? Make sure that person's on the team. Who has knowledge of various federal or state regulations that you might need to know? Make sure they're on the team. Do you have someone who handles IT? You're going to need that. Who's good at organizing gatherings or events or even birthday parties in the office? Because that might be the person you want to tap to organize your press conferences if it comes to that, and it may. And who on your staff is a good talker? Someone who can articulate things well. You might want to get them on the team. Is there someone who writes well and can write fast? You may need that person. All of these people are needed on the crisis communication team. So you really need to just take into account what you do, what your agency does, and pick some people who will be a positive part of your team. Okay, next slide. The spokesperson. Picking a spokesperson is one of the most important decisions of crisis communication. It's really vital. Who is the right person for this particular crisis? And it all depends on what the crisis is. Are they your expert who can answer questions easily? Do they know all the ins and outs of situations? And they also have to be someone that the public will believe and who can be easily understandable. And that means this person has to be able to explain a complex event in a simple way. And this person also needs to have knowledge of the crisis and how it's going to impact your company or the public or its customers. And they also need to show some compassion as well, because that's vital these days. A spokesperson also has to be likable and not condescending when they do answer questions or even talk to the public, because talking to the public is a very important part of this spokesperson's duties. And they have to have a calm demeanor, and they have to be able to stand by quietly and even respectfully when they're confronted by a bunch of hostile journalists or aggressive journalists or some very angry customers. Even some state, local, federal lawmakers can be angry at times. So you have to be able to just take it for a while and smile as much as you can and be calm about things. All right, next slide. Training. You need to train your spokesperson. It's so vital. Whether it's a CEO or the head of an agency, the spokesperson needs to be fully trained with simulations and tabletop exercises a few times a year. And don't skimp on that. Really put them through the test. It really needs to be like a boot camp situation at times. You got to be tough, because these people are going to be the ones who are speaking for your company under possibly hostile situations. And you don't want your agency to pick the wrong person for that. Here at the college, we often hold a full day of exercises on dealing with a crisis and how we communicate that crisis. And we never have as many details of what we're doing when we're doing the tabletop or the actual exercise, because the facilitator makes sure that we only get the information that would possibly unfold at the time of a crisis. So we may not know all through the day how things are going to turn out, but we have to react and we have to know how to do that. I remember one time we started at 5 a.m. We got phone calls to get out of bed. We didn't know it was coming. They told us, of course, that this is a drill, so we knew it wasn't real, but we had to get up one cold morning and do an exercise in which two of our students had apparently fallen through the ice on the campus lake and had drowned. And we also invited the police and first responders to join us in that drill as well, and they graciously showed up and did their part, made it look very realistic. We also let the local reporters know what we were doing, so in case they got calls that something strange was going on campus, they would know it was just a drill. And we also held a fake news conference and threw in some hard questions that were designed to stump the spokesperson or the other people who were speaking at the time. And we had fun doing that, but it made them very uncomfortable, but it really helped them. And we even had a couple of people pose as the parents of one of the students, and they stormed the chancellor's office demanding answers while their son or daughter had fallen through ice and died. We were exhausted by the end of the day, but we learned so much. And we even had a hostage exercise one day. We scared a group of workers who were placing a roof on the building. We didn't think to tell them what was going on. And all of a sudden, we had a blindfolded campus police officer walk out of the building with fake blood on his pants. And the roofers really got scared. They didn't know what was going on. So you got to make it as realistic as you can when you plan these things. And more often, we'll do a tabletop exercise. It's not as intense, but they are very beneficial. It gives us time to quickly react and show what we would do in various situations. And the biggest takeaway from that is seeing how your spokesperson delivers the key messages that you will develop. And I'll go into that later on, but it's just so important to practice and practice often. And remember, if there's a loss of life in your crisis or some serious danger to the public or your customers, the CEO or the agency head should probably be the one to speak because people expect that. And they want to do that as well. They want to take responsibility and show some compassion. But many crisis situations can be handled by your basic agency spokesperson. And in fact, it's often better if you save the CEO or the big gun in your company to use only when necessary, because that kind of lets everybody know how important you're taking this and how you're going to deal with the crisis. I've often said, it's always best to let the spokesperson take the heat. That's what they're trained for, and they understand it. All right, next slide. How many spokespersons, spokespeople, or spokespersons do you need? There's no rule that says you just have to have one. It's perfectly fine to have many spokespeople lined up and trained. The type of crisis could dictate the selection of your spokesperson. If there's some sort of technical crisis, you want to pick someone who knows what's going on with that issue. And remember, each crisis will be different, and each crisis communication strategy will be different. And you can do all the planning in the world, and it's usually not for the crisis you will experience, and that's almost always the situation. But really be as flexible as you can depending on the situation, and consider backup. I know I actually have a backup on the campus, someone who's off campus in case I'm actually involved in the crisis or something horrible happens. Tara Taylor Kesterman from the Department of Mines and Minerals and Energy is actually my backup. If something happens, they're going to call her to come in and help if she needs to work. So it's always good to have a backup in place as well. And your spokespeople should really speak from the heart when it's needed. It makes a very big difference to see compassion on the face of someone who's being interviewed by WCYB. If there's a crisis situation, it means a lot. All right, next slide. Okay. In a crisis, people want to see someone who's a strong leader, who knows what they're talking about, fast on their feet, because a strong leader needs to be unafraid of taking charge. It's fine for the spokesperson or the CEO to detail the steps that they're going to be taking to deal with the crisis, or even what they should have done in the first place if the crisis was actually the fault of the agency or the company. And that person really has to think fast and come across as confident when questioned. And that's not only by the news media, but by the public who'll be calling your office constantly. And the confidence will go a long way to restore the public's belief in a company. And I know former Vice President Dick Cheney, he had a way of doing this. People may not have always agreed with him, but the man came across as confident, and he was able to handle many issues that way. All right, next slide. So when a crisis hits, you really need to act fast. You have to be able to defend your agency or yourself or your company as quickly as possible, because others will fill that silence with their own version of the story. It just makes good sense to tell your own story, because you don't want to give a keyboard warrior or reporters the ability to speculate and come up with their own version of what might have happened or their own version of facts. If you give the public or the media the facts, it will go a long way toward putting your own spin on the situation. To say nothing or just to stay quiet really makes you look like you're afraid of something, or you're hiding things. And it also makes you or your agency look incompetent from time to time. Next slide. So here's where developing your key messages come into play. It's very important to develop a list of messages that you really want to get out. Get together with your crisis communication team and immediately when a crisis happens and discuss what it is you really want to say to the public about what's going on. Do you want to assure everybody that the crisis is under control? Do you want to ask the public for help in some ways? And that actually might be what you need to do one day. So you really need to figure out your main messages that you want to convey to the public and stick to it. Don't stray from that. And again, practice with the spokesperson as much as possible. Teach them to talk in what's called a 12-second soundbite. And basically that is 12 seconds of a good statement that the TV news producers can edit together. And it has a clear, succinct message that they can easily fit into a 20 or 30-second broadcast news story. And the same thing works for good quotes in print media as well. I really can't tell you exactly how to develop your key message because each crisis is different. But if you determine your main points that you want to make and keep your message to those general topics, you will do well. And believe it or not, the public will actually show you some respect if you are upfront with them and show that you value their concerns and that you're listening to them. And it's also a good idea to develop your messages in case you have bad news that you need to break to the public, and that happens. It's never easy to do that, but it will go a long way if you're out front first. If you have to play defense, if WJHL breaks the bad news, you're already losing the crisis communication battle. So choose your words carefully. When we decided last spring to send our students home for virtual learning because of COVID, we didn't have a lot of time to craft the message, but it worked well. We got the word out to the media. We sent emails to the students, let their parents know, created a web page with all the questions they may need to know, and that actually worked well. Okay, next slide. I thought I would share one of our crisis communication issues with you. And this one had been brewing for a while. We had a social media storm all about a year before this issue happened. We handled that one early, and it shut down some of the social media dust up. But then basically all hell broke loose. We had some bus issues. UVA Wise had a fleet of 4 buses that we used for athletes and to transport students to presentations at other colleges. And those buses, like any vehicle in the fleet, broke down from time to time. And we had to deal with angry parents and frustrated students who found themselves on the side of the interstate waiting for a replacement bus to pick them up and take them on to their journey. And the situation grew worse one day at about 2 a.m. one morning when I got a call that a bus was taking our softball team to a game and it caught fire. And I was told the students got out safe and that I'd be contacted soon when there was more news. And I sure was contacted very quickly by WJHL, WCYB, and CNN because the bus that was fully engulfed in flames took about 4 minutes to actually burn completely. And the driver and the coaches were able to get the players safely out. But that fire was captured by mobile phone videos from passersby on the interstate. It was posted on Facebook. And the players who got off the bus with just the clothes they were wearing had grabbed their cell phones, and some of them were videoing it as well and posting it on Facebook. They were terrified. It was really a nightmare. You could hear students screaming, and the bus was completely destroyed. All their equipment, their clothes, their laptops, everything was a total loss. And one student even got off the bus in time, but she was just wearing one shoe. So you can imagine how this appeared to the world. And some people on social media outright blamed the chancellor of the college for that and said the situation rested on her shoulders, which was totally unfair, but it was out there. So in between calls to the media and with other college leaders, I spoke with Chancellor Henry, and she decided quickly that it'd be best just to ground all the buses until we could get a full safety inspection by the Virginia State Police on all the buses in the fleet. And we seriously took one horrible social media hit after the other. And we even had news crews on campus the next day to ask why we did not take earlier concerns about buses breaking down from time to time seriously. Of course we did. It's totally not true. We were able to show that what happened in Ohio was that a blowout on a tire created sparks, and that actually caused the bus to ignite. And the Ohio Police Department backed us up on that and responded that the driver's actions really saved many lives that night. But there was nothing we could have done to prevent the fire. All right, next slide. And that's part of the article from the first day. There you go. So what happened next? In the statement the next day, in a written statement, Chancellor Henry told the press that she was going to meet with the students when they returned to campus. She was going to listen to them about their experience. And she arranged for our campus mental health counselors to be there as well, because we knew the players were traumatized by this. And the chancellor explained that what the college would do to handle the situation now and make sure this would never happen again. And she had other college officials there as well to explain how the players' belongings would be replaced. And we saw that statement actually showed compassion, and it showed swift action, and it outlined what we would do to make things right as best as we could. All right, next slide. And the next one. And so the softball message that we crafted that day is a good example that shows how you can target your messages to your particular audience. The students and their parents needed to know we had grounded the buses. And even though it would be an economic hardship, we chose to do that. We wanted them to know that safety was the most important issue. And the public listened, and they saw what happened. And some of them even sent money to help us replace the lost equipment. We never solicited that, but something about the softball bus fire actually touched the public, and they reached out to us. University of Virginia's insurance paid for the students' lost items. Of course, the insurance on the bus paid for that. And we ended up selling the buses, and we now contract with a company to transport our sports team and students to games and matches and other events that they need to go to. But the first response really sets the message and the tone, and we think that one worked well. We set the tone early, and we stuck with the message, and that worked. All right, next slide. Okay. There's some general tips that I can show you about dealing with crisis communication. You really need to address the crisis head on. And once again, I'll stress to tell the people what you know at the time. Don't hesitate. You can always update later when you have more information when it comes through. The health and safety is always going to be your priority, your most important aspect of your message. So make sure you get that in there in clear, concise way. And remember to stick to the facts. Don't speculate at all. And I can't stress enough how important it is to tell the truth. The media is really unforgiving when they're lied to. It's perfectly okay to say you don't have all the details now, but you need to also stress that you're working on the situation, and you'll update people as soon as you can, and stick to that. Do that. If there's some sort of crime related to your crisis, you'll need to stress that you can't get ahead of the police investigation, but continue to show what you're doing to help those that are involved cope with the situation. All right, next slide. Once again, if a death has occurred, and we hope that never happens, never say that you will do what you can to make things right when you're not sure you can do that, especially in a situation as tragic as that. If there is an ongoing investigation, tell the media that, but don't just rely on the agency that's doing the investigation. It's often helpful if you do your own work, see what's going on in case if it's an accidental death or something especially, and it's not crime related. You want to learn as much as you can about what happened and what you can do about that. And if you tell the media or anyone in the public who calls you, like the softball parents were doing, that you'll get back to them, do it as soon as you can. That goes a long way into helping you with your crisis communication issue. And it's always perfectly acceptable to issue a written statement for print, broadcast, or social media. Some ways that works better. I think sometimes that works best. You may not always get to do that. You may have to talk to people on the radio. You may have to get in front of the camera, but that's just what you do as part of the job. Next slide. The dreaded interview questions. Not my favorite part of the job, but it's such an important one. During an interview with the media, it's often difficult. And training, I keep saying training over and over. That's my theme for the day, I believe. But it's true. And I learned that lesson during the softball bus fire. I asked a person in athletics to speak with WCYB about the situation and what we were doing. And the reporter asked a simple question. This wasn't a hostile reporter. This was somebody who just wanted to tell the story, and they were being very nice to us. And the question was, do you feel it's safe for students to ride the bus? And never mind that the chancellor had already grounded the buses. The person in athletics got really frustrated and said, no, I don't think it's safe. And so my heart just sank at that. And then I had to go out there and get in front of the camera and explain what we had done and explain the situation. And WCYB aired both the athletic person and me. But the damage really was already done. It kind of muddied up the message we were getting out. So I learned from that day on to train everybody as best you can. Hold practice media interviews, even the full news conference that I talked about earlier, and have these people who participate pepper the spokesperson with questions and be very tough. Also, there's always the loaded question. It's good to look out for any loaded questions during an interview. If someone asks you, isn't it true that? You don't want to repeat those words. You want to turn it around and say, that's not true. That's not a true premise. In fact, here's what happened and here's what we're going to do about it. And that way you're turning that around in your words, so it can't be construed in another way. And if a reporter asks, how can you say that? Once again, you stick to your key message and turn the question into a positive if you can. say something like, I can say that because we will do this, 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 and that way this situation may not occur again. And it's always good when you're going to be interviewed, take some time to anticipate what they may ask you. And I found the best way to do that is to think what you would want the reporter to ask someone. If you were the reader of the news story or the viewer of that TV broadcast, put yourself in that situation. What do you want to know, and what will this reporter ask? And if you do that and give short answers when you can, and keep those answers narrowly focused, you can get through those interviews. All right, next slide. The COVID virus. That's a good example for any virus situation, actually. Get out in front first, work with the Virginia Health Department, and again, conduct your own investigation if you can as well. COVID is still a big issue for many of us these days, especially in crisis communication. We got out front at UVA Wise early on and sent our students to virtual learning before many colleges in the nation did, actually. It worked, and that gave us some extra time that we needed to get ready for the fall semester and return to campus. And that's worked well for us. Courtney and some other people are doing a really good job with our prevalence testing, and we have been so lucky so far to not have had a big outbreak anywhere. And I think that has to do with the time we gave ourselves to really plan. So please do that if this is a situation that your agency may be dealing with. We work closely with the health department. We still do. They're on our COVID task force team, and they're very helpful. We also do our version of contact tracing when we can, just to be sure that we're doing things right. We developed a COVID webpage, and we keep it updated. We have a res hall that's only for anybody who needs to be quarantined or isolated for a while. And last I heard, we have nobody in isolation, and probably only one person in quarantine right now, just awaiting some test results. I still get calls from the New York Times over our COVID for some reason, a few times a month now, but that's dying out because I can point them to our web page and our dashboard, and that seems to have helped the situation better. So communicating is really important when you're dealing with the virus. All right, next slide. Social media. I can bet almost all of you deal with this. It's something that just gets out of hand very much, so all the time. All right, next slide. The new media, which is what I call social media, can be the best and the worst crisis communication tools around. And here's a list of some of them. I left off YouTube for some reason, but add YouTube to that list of some of the things that we have in terms of social media tools. But the problem is social media in the hands of some people has caused a major change in crisis communication. And there's no sign that it's going to slow down. And it's likely to get even worse, especially as new platforms develop that we don't even know what they will do now. Look at how social media worked with recent social movements across the nation these days. Notice how it's used in protests. Social media influences opinions and actions. Even a small blog somewhere can have a big impact. Social media really makes it easier for rumors and cyber crisis to arise just at the drop of a hat. And unfortunately, you have to deal with it when it happens. It normally would blow over, but not always. Sometimes you really have to deal with it. We had an issue several weeks ago when a longtime college employee was busy doing COVID cleaning tasks, and his job was to raise the U.S. flag in the morning, and he did, but he was busy and he accidentally raised the flag upside down. A student saw it within probably 30 minutes after the flag was raised and decided that he would fix the flag himself, and he did. But instead of alerting anybody at the campus about this situation, he posted photos and posted it all over Facebook. And we really got slammed. There was thousands of comments on that single post about how disrespectful that was. And it was an accident. We know it was an accident. The employee felt horrible, but for some reason, people just really, they were fixated on it, and they thought we were being disrespectful. So that went on for a few days. And what made it really worse is there's a professor who's had a small cardboard drawing of a flag hung upside down in the inside of his office window when that faces outside. And that's been there for about 4 years, but that situation erupted again because of the accidental flag situation. And we had no choice. We had to issue a statement. We issued a statement on Facebook because that's where this fire happened. And we were, of course, attacked by some for issuing the statement, defended by others for that. And it took probably 2 weeks at least for the issue to die down. I spoke with many upset people on the phone who called. They had untrue rumors related to the flag. And they demanded that we have the professor remove the flag from his window. And I had to talk to them sometimes 30, 40 minutes at a time and explain that the First Amendment and legal counsel said we can do nothing about the flag in the window. And most eventually calmed down by the end of the conversation. And I think it helped that I genuinely listened to them and their concerns because I respected their opinions. And they seem to appreciate that a lot. And I found that listening really is a major part of crisis communication. So I always listen to the people who call and who are upset. And you can sometimes get to the issue that's troubling them the most. And if you can help them with it, that's good. So many times a crisis communication can be dealt with by a simple phone call. All right, next slide. There's also cons for social media and pros. It's been said that the only way to put out a social media fire is with social media water. It's often unfair and unreliable at times for social media, but the mobile devices make everyone a news hound or a news hen, so you really got to get ready. It's going to happen, and just be ready for it. It's a storm. It's not fun. Next slide. Well, the good news is you can also use social media to bypass any traditional media if they're not of help to you or if you want to get your own version of the story out to the public. So don't hesitate to use that. You can do a YouTube video that works well if you have someone in your staff who can put together a video quickly that shows your side of the story. You'll get a lot of views. People do like to watch videos. That's one of the most popular things on social media these days. And if you've done something, your company's done something, and you need to apologize, social media is also a good way to do that. If you've messed up in some way, consider that. And since it's hard to catch a social media fire quickly, set up a Google alert with some keywords in there, your company name, your agency name, maybe some name of your senior leadership, put them in there. And anytime that person's name or your company shows up, you'll get an alert that shows you where on the internet or social media that happened. And that way you can monitor better. It'll help you keep up with the conversations that are going on in the post or the tweets about you or your company. So it's always a good idea. There are expensive apps and companies that will monitor this for you, but I've found so far that Google Alerts and a few things like that can actually work well if you set up the right keywords for the various platforms. And the Virginia State Police, I've learned that they have some high-tech equipment that monitors social media posts in case they see something brewing in the region that they need to keep an eye on. We actually relied on the Virginia State Police a few years ago when the KKK actually threatened to march on campus over that professor's window. But of course, that flag has been upside down for 4 years there. I spent another 2 weeks talking to the KKK leader on the phone about his plans and what they were going to do. And I basically ended up telling him that, of course, he had a right to come to campus. That was a public campus. But I also pointed out to him that the media would be there and the people were not allowed to wear masks over their face at that time, pre-COVID. And that his employer and his KKK members' employers would see their faces on the news. And they decided not to show up. And but we did see the chatter that was all over social media, and we were worried, but we were ready. So that's another way you can deal with situations in advance. All right, next slide. Strategies. This is a tough one to talk about because every crisis is different. A good crisis communication plan must include the strategies that you will develop. You have to know if you are actually a victim or a villain in the crisis. That's how you know if the public is on your side or if you need to win them over, if you're having an issue that you're not trusted anymore. Do you need allies who will support you and defend you in certain cases? Rely on them. Put that in your strategy. If you're a victim of a cyber attack or something, be prepared to show how you were attacked and what you'll do in the future to prevent that from happening to you or your customers or anyone who is impacted by that. You can even be a villain at first, but you may end up being the victim the next day. So develop your strategies based on any scenario that you could possibly face. Next slide. Media relationships. Now, I spent 25 years in the media. I think I have a fairly good understanding about what reporters need, and I try to help them with their needs. That's always a good thing to do. They're not always friendly to you. They're not, sometimes they can be hostile, but you still have to be friendly to them, and they're doing their job. And get that in your head. You know, they're doing their job, so here's how I can help them do their job. And that's where a media relationship comes into play. Get to know the reporters and their editors. Learn the names of their pets, even. Invite them to lunch. They may not always do that because they're really not supposed to take a free meal from anybody, but sometimes if you get them to, that's always a good way to get to know them. But also keep in mind that they're not your friends. They're here to do their job, and they're always on duty. So keep your guard up. If you are contacted by a new reporter you've never dealt with, do a little bit of research on them on Google. See what they write, what tack they take, what kind of articles they actually do, what kind of broadcast stories they do if they're on the TV news. And always remember that reporters they'll often fall silent while they're interviewing you, and that's a trap. They know that silence is uncomfortable. If I took 10 seconds right now, complete silence, it would be uncomfortable for you. It's a trap they set because they hope that you fill that silence with more information. And so don't do it. You just sit it out until they actually speak. So that's a little tip. All right, next slide. Well, here's an example of where a relationship with the media came into play for me. Our college was hacked a few years ago, and $1 million was taken. Apparently, it was some Russians who hacked us. And I had to stand up in front of cameras and answer tons of questions. But the problem was the FBI told me not to say much. They told me some basics about what they were doing. And I really had to comply. And a WCYB crew showed up, and they kept asking me the same questions over and over. And I just had to keep coming up with many ways to say the same thing, that I couldn't say much. The FBI had asked me not to talk. And basically, that's all I could do. And one of the friendly cameramen that I had known for years, he finally told the young reporter to leave me alone. Can't you see she can't answer that? He said. And I really thought that was because of the relationship that I had developed with them, that helped. We actually got the money back. It was on its way to Russia, and we stopped it with the help of the FBI and some others. And the FBI let me say that the next day, but I still couldn't give details. But I was all smiles on camera that day, because that was some good news. And I'll also never forget how the local reporters treated me well, and the college well, when we had a fake gunman report a few years ago. They were sympathetic when they thought that there was a real gunman on campus, and they did all they could do to help us get the correct story out. But the national media, that was another story. I even got called by Anderson Cooper, and I explained to him we had no evidence of a gunman. We were searching. There had been a report of one, and that was totally ignored. We even had, at the time, the editor of our student newspaper was in one of the dorms, and he called Anderson Cooper, and he was giving full details of where our police were on campus and what they were doing, what building they were going to, because he could see it out the window. So while we couldn't do much on the national scene, our local reporters that we had relationships with did all they could do to help us get the real story out. So build those relationships. All right, next slide.
Kathy, we've got about 10 minutes left. Just wanted to alert you.
Oh, very good. Well, we'll wrap this up quick. There's a good way to build your crisis communication plan, but you want to keep it short. Keep it in a loose leaf binder. Make a copy for everybody on your team. Make it easy to read. Put contact information in there. Even put police contact in there. And that's the best way to build it. It's going to be specific to your company. You can even do an electronic version, but just make sure that you keep that safe from everybody else, because you don't want everybody to see what your plan is. All right, next slide. Go over the duties of your team, who has to agree on a final message, who will deliver that message. Next slide. And here's your final thoughts. Just to have some bold leadership, be decisive, overcome your fear. All right. Any questions?
Thank you, Kathy. I know there's been times that we all sweat when we get those questions, but you did a great job.
Oh, well, appreciate that.
Trying to walk them through the steps of what they need to do to be prepared. We have one question that's coming in. Who are some public figures in the past 20 to 30 years that have been masters of public crisis management? I would imagine that the first ones that come to mind are politicians.
They are. I don't know if you remember one of our regional ones, William Wampler, was state senator. He was one of the top ones. He was very good at it. I guess for better or worse, depending on your politics, Barack Obama is good. Mitt Romney, even though he messed up with that Cadillac quote, he was a good one. But William Wampler, to me, sets the best example of how you can deal with the crisis. And Rick Boucher as well. And probably in Tennessee, Roe is not too bad. He can stand up and answer questions well. So I would say those are the best public figures right now.
Okay. Do we have any other questions?
Kathy, this is Mandy. I'm with Small Business Development Centers, and you did a wonderful job. I had to step out just for a few minutes, but and you may have addressed this while I was out, but I know for me personally, whenever I have so much communication coming in, I sometimes get confused, or I maybe get flabbergasted or something of that nature. But I think, who you talk to is that. Do you keep record of who calls you or who contacts you? And if so, what kind of information do you track?
We actually, in our crisis plan, we have my administrative assistant helps track that. We write down who they are, if they're with an agency, if they're just an individual. We get their contact information, and we listen to see exactly what they want to know. And we keep a track record of that, and we make sure we call them, sometimes more than once.
Okay.
And Kathy, just a couple of things that I picked up on was I think being prepared is your best bet to handle a crisis. If that keeps you from saying something that you shouldn't have, but also having the right team that, you don't have staff members that are going out and responding to questions, even if it's a question on social media. And I was just thinking, and I'm not an HR guru, but I wonder if it's just something that employers can put in their employee manuals about how do you handle press, or, what you share about a crisis or something that happens. If that's allowed, that way you have something to talk to that employee after it.
Yeah. I'm sure it is. That's in our faculty staff handbook, that if there's a question about the media, please contact the spokesperson to help you with your message. We're not saying that they can't talk to the press. Of course, professors and staff do, but we're able to give them some tips when possible. And that really helps and goes a long way. But I think most companies should do that and put that in their plan. These are the people who will contact the media and who will speak to the media.
Right.
Can I expand on that as far as Sandy's question is, do you all have a policy regarding crisis communication and staff making social media statements? Because I know, there have been companies have started including statements in regards to just discussing anything having to do with your company on social media. So I guess I'm asking, do y'all go even as far as the crisis aspect to it?
We don't, because we are a state agency. So we really don't have a set policy on what people can post on social media. We just ask them to be respectful. And if they are associated with the college, they need to say whether their post is associated with the college or not, because that's the problem we run into. It could be a political post, but if they have a UVA Wise background in their Facebook page, that's frowned upon.
Well, and that, in essence, could cause a mini crisis because of it being political in and with it. So doing that can be maybe a preemptive strike in making those calls.
Right. And I imagine private companies have more leeway. They can do that. But it's always, I think, a good idea to put in the HR books, here's what you should and should not do.
Cool. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So, Kathy, again, I want to thank you for your time putting this together and for presenting today. And for those of you who don't know, Kathy and I graduated from high school together, but she is sworn to secrecy to not share anything that happened during high school with me. But I really do appreciate my friend for sharing today. We'll be sharing the slides that Kathy presented today, as well as the link if you would like to have this video from today as a resource that not only for you to keep in, but there might be someone that you feel like could benefit from us. Next week will be our final session of the Refocus and Rebuild. My friends at the Small Business Development Center Networks in Southwest Virginia will be leading that session. They're also going to be joined by Michael Lockhart. He is the CFO of KVAT Stores. That's our Food City group here in Southwest Virginia. And they're going to talk about how their business had a continuation plan that helped them during this pandemic. And that's why, again, being prepared and why we did this whole series of developing your resiliency plan. So I hope you could join us next Thursday, same place at noon. And again, thanks for joining us, and I hope everybody has a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Bye.